My dad and I don't get along. Haven't since I can remember. He just didn't want to deal with having a daughter who was disabled. Still doesn't. In fact, neither one of my parents' house is wheelchair accessible, and we don't see each other very often.
People with disabilities have struggled for years to gain the freedom and respect they deserve from the rest of society. The struggles of people with disabilities were very similar to the struggles of African Americans during the time before the Civil Rights Movement. People with disabilities were often discriminated against solely because of their disability. They were looked down upon by society, and often the families of those with disabled relatives were made to feel ashamed of their relatives' disability. The shame, as well as the lack of knowledge of how to properly care for a person with a disability, prompted many families to send their disabled relatives away to mental facilities, nursing homes, and other restrictive institutions, places where they were often neglected, misdiagnosed, and mistreated. Many people with disabilities were unable to obtain employment due to either discrimination or a non-accommodating work environment. Also, many people with disabilities were unable to access certain buildings or take advantage of public transportation due to a lack of disability accommodations, such as a wheelchair ramp. It was not until the 1970s that positive change for the disabled community began to occur. Prominent disabled rights activists like Ed Roberts, who is often called the father of independent living, and Justin Dart Jr., who is affectionately referred to as the Martin Luther King Jr. of the disability rights movement, rallied together with the disabled community to take a stand. With similar struggles, the disability rights movement modeled their protest actions after the civil rights movement. Parents, friends, family members, and the disabled themselves performed sit-ins, marched in the streets, and barricaded public buses to protest against the injustice. Finally, their voices were heard when Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act was passed. This passage made it illegal to discriminate against someone based on a disability in federal agencies, programs, and employment. This was a real turning point in the disability rights movement because it meant that the government finally recognized their struggles as discrimination rather than what should be expected when being born with a disability. According to the directing attorney for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, enactment of Section 504 evidenced Congress' recognition that the inferior social and economic status of people with disabilities was not a consequence of the disability itself, but instead was a result of societal barriers and prejudices. However, the passage of Section 504 and the 1973 Rehabilitation Act proved to not quite be as effective as anticipated. When the law was tested in courts, particularly the Southeastern Community College versus Davis court case, the flaws were revealed. This case was about Miss Davis' desire to participate in the school's nursing program. However, she was turned away due to her hearing impairment. The court ruled in the school's favor, stating that Miss Davis would not be able to fulfill the duties required because of her disability. This ruling proved to the disabled community that more needed to be done to fight and prove to the world that people with disabilities have the desire to be active members of the community and workforce, and have the capability to do so. The fight continued as thousands of people with disabilities, as well as friends and family, swarmed the courthouse to tell their stories. Those who could not be present wrote letters to Congress to raise awareness of the significance of the discrimination that they faced and the importance of passing laws to protect against these types of discrimination. That is when the Americans with Disabilities Act came into play. George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law on July 26, 1990. This was a piece of legislation that was long awaited for the disabled community, one that was hoped to significantly change their way of living for the better. As stated by the directing attorney for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, the ADA is based on a basic presumption that people with disabilities want to work and are capable of working, want to be members of their communities and are capable of being members of their communities, and that exclusion and segregation cannot be tolerated. Accommodating a person with a disability is no longer a matter of charity, but instead a basic issue of civil rights. While the disabled community was pleased with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, many had strong feelings against it. The two main opposing parties to the passage of the ADA included churches and small businesses. Many churches were afraid of being deemed public accommodations because, according to the ADA, places deemed public accommodations were by law required to be accessible to all disabled people. This worried many churches because they did not feel that they would be able to afford to make the costly modifications. Similarly, small business owners also argued that it would be far too expensive and difficult to make the necessary accommodations. Moreover, some disabled people even attempted to abuse the ADA and sue and/or blackmail countless business owners for minor or obscure ADA violations, causing significant harm to some small business owners. Many amendments have been made since the first passage of the ADA. The newest version of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act of 2008, which was signed into law by President George W. Bush, now offers a broader range of protections for people who are disabled, including those who have AIDS, as well as protections to small business owners to help avoid future abuse of the ADA.
Very important that we understand that this is a continuous struggle. It is a civil right to be independent in America. We did it during slavery. We did it during Reconstruction. We did it during Jim Crow. We can do it.